Please join us in a moment of silence for Calvin Parker. Calvin Parker, who was at the center of what he believes was an alien abduction in 1973 on the Pascagoula River, has passed away at the age of 68. News of Calvin's passing has hit the world a week after his death on August 24th. I was so honored to get the opportunity to talk with this living legend at the time who has now departed us. Calvin Parker joined us on 2 episodes in 2018 and in 2019. In fact, in the 2019 episode, was joined by many of his friends. So we present these shows together, back-to-back, commercial-free, in honor of Calvin and his passing. Rest in peace. And I know that this incident, which happened on October 11th, 1973, certainly has impacted, to say the least, Calvin's life. He was 19 years old at the time. He and his friend Charles Hickson were fishing on the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. And it was a trip that would turn out to be one they would never forget. In the early evening, both men were startled when a strange craft descended and hovered a few feet above the ground, just a few yards away. Before they had the chance to run, an opening appeared in the craft, and now floated 3 humanoid creatures, which grabbed them and took them aboard the craft, where they were both subjected to an examination and at one point believed they were about to die. Minutes later, Calvin and Charles were deposited back on the riverbank, and the craft departed. They took off in their car, located a public telephone, and called the local sheriff, as you might imagine. A short time later, while still disoriented, they were interviewed at the local sheriff's office, and the next day the press descended on this unsuspecting Mississippi town. Calvin has been seriously disturbed by what happened and has largely remained in the background without ever detailing the full account of what happened that night, how it affected him in his life, and other close encounters he has experienced over the years. But he's here to do so now. Calvin tells his story in the book Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, which is now out from Flying Disc Press. Calvin, it's a privilege to have you on the program tonight.
Well, it's a privilege to be here. I've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Yeah, actually, I think you were looking forward to it like a month ago, because I remember we had a date set, and then I had to change it, and Calvin had emailed me about a month ago, are we doing this program? And I really wanted to say, Calvin, yeah, we're doing the program tonight, but it just wasn't in the card, so it's good to finally have you here on the program. Now, are you joining us from Mississippi tonight?
I am. I'm just about 6 miles from where this took place. And actually, I've lived here just before Katrina. And I moved back to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but I just kept quiet about it because I didn't want everybody to know where I was. So
take us back to 1973. You were 19 years old. You went out with a friend. You were fishing. You weren't really having a good day of it, from what I hear. And, well, I kind of described the event. First, before we get into the event, describe the area where you were, please.
Well, I was working in Laurel, Mississippi, and I changed jobs. And this is my first day on the job. So I came to Pascagoula, Mississippi, the Mississippi Gulf Coast, with a friend of mine, Charles Hickson, that hired me. He was working in a shipyard, so they hired me as a shipfitter. And we had worked all day long, and for an October day, it was hot. It was probably up in the 90s that day. So we got off work, and Charlie wanted to go fishing, and I did too, because you just don't feel like going home and eating and going to bed. So we was going to unwind for the day, went and got our fishing equipment at his apartment. I had rented a room from him, and left and went to an old abandoned shipyard on the East River. And I noticed when we pulled up, it was about 15 minutes from his house. So we pulled up to go fishing, and I noticed I never had been down here that much. And I looked around, and there was a lot of trash and debris and all on this shipyard. And I thought, man, they don't keep this place up too good. But I knew it was abandoned because there was some no trespassing signs out there. And I said, Charlie, we're going to get in trouble about fishing here. He said, no. I know these people. Well, come to find out, it really didn't, because it had been shut down a while. So we gathered up our equipment, and we walked probably the length of a football field from the car to the river where we were, and that left the car up on land behind us. And the reason I'm describing this, because that's close to the proximity where the craft landed. So we walked to the river, and there was no steel pier, and we pulled us up an old log, and we were sitting on it and just fishing. Hadn't been there just a few minutes, and I was looking across the water, and I noticed some blue hazy lights flashing. And the first thing that came to my mind, I said, well, you know, the law has blue lights down here. We're trespassing on private property. Now we worked all day. We're
so you thought the police were coming for you?
That's what I thought. It looked just like the lights. So, but I seen them across the water, so we stood up, both of us did, seen it about the same time, and turned around and looked. And I wish it had been the police there. It might have helped. But the blue lights just kind of flickered some, like on a patrol car, and then they just disappeared, and it was a light so bright that it was blinding. I can't describe how bright that was, shining in your eyes. So we still didn't know what it was, because you couldn't see nothing for the light up until just, you know, your eyes kind of get adjusted.
Were you thinking about running at that point, Calvin?
I was thinking real serious about running, because I didn't know what it was and never seen nothing like this before, no lights or anything. So, but on the left of me was water, because they had dug in for the shipyard for a ship wake. On the right was water. Behind me was the river. So I did the only logical thing I could do. I just scooted in behind Charlie. I said, well, you know, he seems to be brave enough. So I thought I'd just get in behind him. We'll see what happens to old Charlie here. But they was on us so fast. It was 3 bulky-looking beings, and they moved like robots. They had kind of gray, wrinkled skin, and they weren't that tall, 4.5, 5 foot tall. And their head looked like it just sat down on the shoulders. But Charlie could describe some facial features, but I never did really see no facial features. So 2 of them had got a hold of Charlie.
Well, sorry, what did Charlie describe? Did he describe slits, or full eyes, and what color were they? Well,
you know, I never really talked to him. I just read later, seen an artist drawing where he described kind of slits and carrot-looking ears or something, you know, that just stuck out. Could have been antennas, though, because I really feel like these things was robots that come got us. And the reason I say that, just the way they moved, it was mechanical looking. And they were strong and fast, though. And they was hovering probably 2 foot off the ground. And I didn't know anything that the United States had that would do that. I knew they had experimented with these jetpacks and all, but this wasn't no jetpack. So 2 of them had got a hold of Charlie, and 1 got a hold of me, and that's when the fear kind of left, because they injected something into my arm. So I don't know what it was, but it just really relaxed me. And they started carrying us toward the ship. Now, this is where I lost sight of Charlie. I don't know where he went, but I couldn't turn my head or nothing. All I could do was just look forward to where they was taking us, and my eyes was just fixed on where we was going. And I remember looking, I wanted to see where them lights came from, because I really wanted to see where we was going, but I never seen no light fixtures anywhere. When we got to the door of the ship, you know, I kind of rolled my eyes and looked around, and all you could see is the light looked like it was coming out of the walls. So they took us aboard, and they made a little left turn, then a right turn with me, and they put me in a room, and they laid me on something. I don't know if it was a table or what it was, but it was about a 16-degree angle. And that's when I was laying there just looking up, and that's all I could do. Something came out of the ceiling about the size of a deck of cards, and it got right straight down about a foot from my head, and it stopped, and then it clicked, and it went to the other side, and it clicked again, then went behind, it clicked 4 times, then it went back up in the ceiling. And then I noticed the old big, ugly creature that brought me in, he kind of backed up to the wall a little bit, and a different one came. Now, I don't know where she come from. I didn't see a door. I didn't see another room or anything. But again, I couldn't turn my head. I was, all I could do was just roll my eyes to the side a little bit.
Like you were partially paralyzed.
Oh, I was. I couldn't move anything. And I figured that's what he injected into me, to keep me from being able to move and keep me from being able to run, because I would have definitely run if I could have. So this other little creature wasn't near as frightening looking, and I call it a female. Now, I don't know whether it is or not or was, but it was kind of feminine looking. And, usually a man can sense a female regardless if it's what it is, and a woman can sense a male's presence. But I just sensed that it was a female presence because it wasn't as big, wasn't as bulky. But I didn't see nothing, but I couldn't turn my head to see as well. That indicated that it was. But whatever it was came in. They took their fingers. Now, they had normal hands where the other one didn't. They had crab-like hands or mitten hands. And this one had fingers, and they was a little longer than what human fingers would be. And they opened my mouth and run their finger down in my mouth and kind of...
all right, they're putting the finger inside his mouth. He's on board a craft. He's been taken along with his friend along the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. We'll continue with Calvin Parker, the Pascagoula abduction tonight. He and Charles, in 1973 on October 11th, are fishing along the banks of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi, and he was describing the beings. They're taken in this craft. Calvin's given an injection in his arm to, call it a tranquilizer of some sort. And then he's on the craft, laid on a table, and they're sticking their fingers in your mouth, Calvin.
Yeah, they're running their fingers in my mouth, and feels like they're trying to go into my nasal cavity. And that was really painful there. That little tranquilizer didn't help a whole lot there.
Oh, my gosh.
So I got to where I was trying to move just a little bit, and I was, got where I could pull back a little. And it's just like she told me, or it said, don't worry, we're not going to hurt you. But she never opened her mouth or never moved her mouth. It was just kind of telepathically said.
And telepathically, that's how you believed it was a female?
Yeah, that's how I believed it was a female. And I believe it was in a female's voice. But the mouth never moved, so maybe they just made up that voice and all to kind of calm us. I don't know. I just feel like from the bottom of my soul that this wasn't the first time that they had abducted somebody or checked them out or something.
Oh, I can pretty much guarantee that.
I feel like I was a guinea pig, and I got to thinking about it later on. This is the... like experimenting with animals like we used to do here. Now, I don't agree with that at all because I love animals. But, we used to use them as lab rats and stuff, and I just don't agree with all that. And I feel like that's what I was during this time. But anyhow, getting back to the story, so after she said that, it kind of calmed me, and she backed away. And the old big ugly one, the mechanical one, the soldier, he came in and got a hold of me in the same way, the same arm, levitated me up a little bit, and scooted us right across all that old marsh grass and that junk. You could see it. You could roll your eyes down and see you just kind of floating over the top of it, and set me down at the river just about exactly where I was, except I was facing the river when I went back with my arms stretched out. And then this is the first time I heard from Charlie, and I was really kind of worried about where he was or what happened, or just worried about him, period. But he told me, he said, Calvin, you all right, son? And when he did, it was just like I wasn't numb anymore. I could move. And I turned around and looked, and we got back just in time. We turned around, both of us, just in time to see where the bright lights disappeared. And I figured that's where they kind of closed the door. And then the little hazy blue lights kind of flashed a little bit. And this thing just disappeared like it went straight up just a little bit and it was gone. You couldn't see it or nothing anymore. So I was kind of relieved when that happened. Charlie said, well, let's sit down here and talk about this a minute. And I was thinking to myself, well, maybe they won't come back. We just sat down here for a minute and get where I can walk. And I said, Charlie, this didn't happen. I said, I don't know what happened to you, but it didn't happen to me. I wasn't here. I ain't seen nothing. I ain't heard it. Let's just get up, go back to the car, go to the house, eat, and go back to bed and be gone. This is over with then. Well, I agree. We don't need to tell nobody. We didn't get to the car good. Charlie said, well, I need to tell somebody. I thought, oh, man. I said, people's going to...
Why didn't you want him to... why didn't you want him to say anything?
Well, this was back in 1973, and nobody would believe you then. And I had just started a new job, and I didn't want everybody to think, and I was fixing to get married. And I didn't want everybody to think we was just idiots or liars and try to pull stuff over. Now, Charlie approached it a little different than I did. He felt like everybody might be in danger, and he wanted to let them know what was going on. And I knew when he did that it was going to be all hell break loose. So I was thinking, well, maybe he'd just call Keesler and they'd mark him up as a nut. Now, Keesler is the local Air Force base in Biloxi. And I said, well, he's going to call Keesler, they'll tell him he's a nut, and they'll just pass it off, and that'll be it. And that's what I was hoping would happen. But, as you see, it didn't happen. So we got in a car, and I noticed that was a brand new car I had. And when we got back to the car, I was looking in the door. I opened the door. You know how you kind of look in and all. And I noticed the window was shattered on his side of the car, and that was the side facing the crowd. And it was just shattered in place. But it had that safety glass in it, so it didn't fall out until you closed the door. And then it just come out in little shrivelers instead of hunks. So we got in, and the glass fell out of the car. We tried to crank the car, and it didn't crank for a few minutes, so we sat there. It took about 15 minutes for it to crank. Now, at this time in our life, we didn't have cell phones. There wasn't no cell phones around. If it was, you had to be rich to have one. And no kind of social media or anything. So we was hunting a payphone, going to find a payphone for him to call Keesler. We finally got the car cranked, went to a little store, and I'm not for sure what it was, but I think it was a Magic Mart store, what they call Magic Mart. Now, the store wasn't open because there's blue laws in the state of Mississippi during this time, and the blue laws didn't allow these stores to open up if they had any kind of liquor in the stores. So they just, you couldn't go in the store and buy liquor or nothing. They just shut the whole city down at 6 o'clock in the evening. So we did. We found a place that had a phone. Charlie went and called Keesler. They told him, well, look, we don't deal with this kind of stuff anymore. This is a UFO. You got a problem for your local law enforcement. You need to call them. And I was hoping Charlie would drop it then. He come back and told me what they said. And we hunted another dime for the phone. And I was hoping that he would let it go then. But he didn't. I said, Charlie, let's not tell nobody. We don't want nobody to know this. We don't want to get out. We'll be classified number one nuts. Nah, we got to tell somebody. So he went back and he called the local sheriff department. And it wasn't just a few minutes. They was pretty quick getting out there. Because to be honest, they told Charlie, y'all stay right where you are, don't move. So I think they thought we was really drinking, and they didn't want us to get in the car and drive off and hit and hurt nobody. So, they was good for the word. It didn't take but just a few minutes, and they pulled up in a patrol car. They looked inside the car. They didn't go in and search the car. They just kind of looked through the windows. Then they asked me to step out, and they did a field sobriety test because I was the one driving. So I was out there jumping up and down on one foot, bending my head backwards, touching my nose, blindfolded and all. And they said, well, you can drive. I said, well, I just did something I couldn't do on a good day, jump up and down with my eyes closed. But anyhow, you can drive, so follow us to the sheriff's department. And that's what we did. We followed them to the sheriff's department. When we got to the sheriff's department, they separated us. They took Charlie into a room and took me into another room, and they interrogated us. And actually, what I told them is just what I told Charlie I was going to tell him. I don't know nothing, I just really don't know. I must have blacked out or something. I don't know anything. And then they put me and Charlie in the same room together. They brought him out, and they took me to another room. And what they had done was put a tape recorder in one of the desks that we didn't know about, and they set us in there just to see what we was going to say. And I didn't find this out, until way later on. But they taped their conversations, what we was talking about. Then they took us back out of this room again, put us in a lobby, and I noticed they got something out of the drawer in there, and I didn't know what it was. And they went in there and listened to it, I guess, and that's when the sheriff came in. Fred Diamond was sheriff then. He said, y'all been through something. Why don't y'all go home, get some rest? We're going to go check this out, and we'll talk to y'all in the morning. So that proved right there, if we was drinking, they wouldn't have let us go. We took every little thing they know that, or I did especially because I was the one driving. So they did everything they could to check us. Now, I don't think they originally went back out to the site and checked it off. I don't know that because Dr. Hynek come down 3 days later, and he went out there. There wasn't no police ribbon or nothing at the site. But I do know they went to that bridge. Highway 90 has a high bridge, and they have it's not a toll bridge, but they let the gates up to let the ships through and all, then they let the gates down. So they have to have a bridge tender inside. And then they got a railroad track the other side that's got a bridge on it. But the tender don't stay in it all the time. But when they walked up to this bridge, they was going to talk to the bridge tender, and they had to wake him up. He was in there asleep in a recliner, had the TV on, and was sitting there asleep and listening to his radio that the boats called from. So if a boat called, he would wake up and go over there and open the bridge and let them through. So he's not real attentive. He didn't sit there and just look out the window. So they just kind of dismissed him, blew it off. And we went on home, went to work the next day. And when we got to work, good gracious alive, you couldn't park a car in there nowhere. The employees couldn't even hardly find a place to park. So, and I thought, well, I wonder what's going on here. They must have some kind of convention and all. We got ready and brassed in and went on in to our stations. And they sent somebody down from the office. They asked for us to come up there, and I thought, oh, no. They fixing to put us in jail or do something. I don't know what's happening. So when we got there, the owner of the company come in and said, I don't know what happened to y'all last night, but we can't even conduct business here today. The phones is ringing. They want to talk to y'all. Everybody on, and sooner or later, everybody out where y'all work's going to want to talk and ask y'all what's going on. He said, that's just human nature. He said, we just pretty much just got to shut this place down for today. So we're going to call our attorney, the shipyard's attorney, to come down, and y'all going to put together a press release so these people will quit calling here and aggravating us, because we got a business to run. So they did it. They called Joe Camingo in, which is their company attorney, and he come in here and talked to us. He asked Charlie what had happened. Charlie had told him. He asked me. I said, I don't know. I don't guess nothing happened. Why? And he said, well, Charlie said it did. We know it did. But anyhow, we got to deal with this press. So he put together a press release. But in the meantime, I had mentioned to him, I said, well, you know, I kind of crawfished back a little bit. I said, we need to see a doctor because we might have been exposed to some kind of disease, bacteria, radiation, or something. We need to see a doctor and get some kind of treatment. Charlie said, oh, we'll be all right. I said, no, we need to see a doctor now. So he did. The attorney set up the interview with the press. We sat in there for a minute, and they sent a patrol car. The sheriff's department sent a patrol car and picked us up and carried us to the local hospital. And when we got to the local hospital, there was a team waiting on us at the door. I've never seen nothing like this in a hospital. It wasn't like carrying you in, going in the emergency room and them checking you. They had a team of doctors sitting at the door, a team of law enforcement officials there, and there was also some reporters already there. They took us in, gave us an examination, took us back out, escorted us to the car, put us inside the car, and carried us to Keesler Air Force Base, which is probably 15 minutes from the hospital. And when we got to the gate, when that patrol car got to the gate where security was, he just flashed his lights, and they was an MP escorted us on back to the place where they was going to check us for radiations. So when they got there, everybody just kind of broke off, you know, and they come out to the car, got us out, took, I don't know what kind of instruments they used, Geiger counters or something, I guess. And they checked us for radiation, and I heard one of them say, they're all clear. And they took their little things they had covering their heads off and said they want to see you inside. So they had somebody escorted us down a long hall. And, you know, it wasn't that long, but it felt like it went on for days just walking through that hall, because I was starting to get tired, aggravated. I thought we was in some kind of big trouble, and we had been in big trouble. And it's kind of like I told the sheriff. He told us when we left the sheriff's department that night before we left, he said, you know, this is a hoax. Y'all going to jail for a long time. Of course, I didn't know what a hoax was. I didn't know what a UFO was. And I turned around and told him, I said, you know, I'd rather be in jail than where I've been. So put me in jail. If I'll be safe in there, that'll be fine with me. So when we got there, they took us into a meeting room and had some long tables in it, set us down, and it was civilians in there as well as a lot of military brass in there. And that's when they, I'm going to call it an interrogation, but it was a real nice interrogation. They was really nice about everything. And they talked to us, and of course, I didn't want to perjure myself then, because they admitted that if you lied about something, you was fixing to go to jail. So I wasn't about to do anything to perjure myself. Back then, I was a good Christian boy, and I just wanted to do what was right. And I didn't want nobody to know about this because this was October 11th. November, I was fixing to get married, and her daddy was a real hard case. And I knew that when he heard this, that'd be the end of the wedding right there, or I thought it would be. Plus, I didn't want to have to explain to everybody what was going on. So I just took the upper road of not talking about nothing, because it's not against the law not to say nothing. So they took us out. They put us back in a patrol car, took us back to the shipyard. And by the time we got back to the shipyard, they told us that Dr. John Allen Hynek was on his way down, and he'd be there in a little bit. So eventually Hynek and Harder showed up and talked to us. And I think Dr. Hynek went out and looked at the site where all this happened. Now, the sheriff's department should have taped this side off, because as far as I was concerned, it was a crime scene, because we was abducted, we was taken against our will. So that should have been a crime scene, regardless of what happened. And there for a long time, like I say, I didn't know what a UFO was, but there was a place called Ingalls Shipyard, and they worked on military ships, submarines, and now they work on drones and things. But at the time, I thought it might be something they was experimenting with, and some of them idiots just got out joyriding and go scare somebody, in which that would have been a scare. But, they checked into all that, and it was confirmed. There's nothing like that. This, they've come to the conclusion that they called it a UFO. Now, whether it was a UFO from another planet or what it was, I don't know to this day really what it was. I just know that we got abducted by something, and I'm figuring it might have been from another planet or interdimensional, and we got examined and put back. Because after that, I left and went back home to law, and I got away from this coast. And ever since then, I've been dodging the media. And that's the reason I decided to write the book. It wasn't that I was ready to talk about it. We was going to a neighbor of ours. I moved back to the coast about just right before Katrina, bought a house. Of course, the house got flooded and underwater, and we lost everything. But anyhow, we rebuilt. And we was on the block, and one of our neighbors passed away. And we went to the wake. My wife and I went to the wake. And while I was at the wake, I messed up. Normally, I don't sign my signature on nothing where anybody could read it, because I didn't want nobody to know where I was. But I messed up and signed a little log book at the wake where they was. And people was coming in from Texas, Pascagoula, Moss Point, and everywhere. And they recognized that name. And they was coming over to talk to me. Well, one of them let the word slip out. And it must have been 5 or 6 people around talking. I didn't feel like that was the place or the time to tell a story, and I didn't want to tell it anyway. But they was curious and wanted to know. So on the way home, my wife said, "Why don't you write a book?" I said, "Well, I don't have any kind of education. I don't know how to write a book. Literature is not my thing, I don't even speak good English." So it was like a kind of a deal where things just come together on its own. So when I got home, she mentioned again. I said, "No, if I find a ghostwriter, I'll write one." I figured I'd blow that off just like that, and she'd let it go. Then the next day, Philip Mandel had been hunting me from the Flying Disc, and he wanted to talk to me about a book that Charlie had written. I've never read a book Charlie written. I just got away from Charlie. I got away from UFOs. I got away from people, got away from the public. I kind of went off grid for a long time. And he had called, and somehow he had found me. and he wanted to talk to me about a book that Charlie had written. And it wasn't really about a book. He wanted me to write a book. And he says, just out of curiosity, Calvin, why hadn't you ever talked about this or anything? And at this time, I never had told my family, my kids, my friends, never talked to nobody about it. Nobody knew.
But he's telling us tonight he's Calvin Parker. We'll continue the story of the Pascagoula abduction. Check out Calvin's book from Flying Disc Press. Got a link up at parabnormalradio.com. You can click it and get to the book, which I highly recommend, about the Pascagoula abduction, 1973. It's entitled Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter. And as we've been hearing from Calvin, 1973, an evening of fishing, quickly turned south. And, well, it sounds like from what we're gathering that Calvin went from not wanting to talk about it to actually believing that he was abducted by extraterrestrials. And local law enforcement would not believe the encounter. And then it was as if they were interrogating Calvin and Charlie and making accusations and threatening them with arrest. Very interesting that they should take that stance. And back we are with Calvin Parker. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you. So when we had got home from the wake, the next day Philip called me in relation to Charlie's book, which I've never read, still hadn't read it. And he says, well, look, he said, why hadn't you told your story? I said, well, if you tell it, the press changes it. They've had hundreds of different stories out there. None of them I've really gave an interview to or nothing. And I just don't want to get into something like that where they change everything that you talk about. So he said, Philip said, well, let me tell you something. Let me run something by you. This is your legacy. You write a book. You put it black and white. You put it on paper. They can't change it. It'd be hard for them to. And I got to thinking about that. So I thought about it about 2 or 3 weeks. And Philip called me a couple of times during that, and I really wouldn't even answer the phone because I wasn't interested. And then my wife started on me again. Then Philip just happened to catch me at the right time one day, and I answered the phone. And I said, well, Philip, I don't have an education. I don't know anything. I don't know how to write a book. You can do it. So I agreed to go ahead and send him what I had, which I hadn't started writing a book. I just had some footnotes that I've kept through the years for myself. And when he got them, he sent them back the next day. He said, that's quite a mess right there. It's got a lot of work we need to do with it. And I agreed with him. But, again, I told him about it. I wasn't an author. I didn't know how to write a book. And I still, this be my first and last book, I believe. But I said, Philip, the only way I would do this, I don't want it chopped up. I don't want it edited. I don't care if words misspelled or not, because that's me. I want the book in its natural state, the way that the book is, because I don't like people coming in and changing what I say. So if we're going to do this, that is the deal that we got. And he agreed, and so far, Philip's left it alone. So I started on the book doing the best I could, and I would send it to him chapter by chapter, and he would go through it and say, maybe you need to talk a little more about this or something. And he never edited a word out, because one thing, I knew he was in the UK, and they speak proper English, and they have different words for different things, and I sure didn't want it in that language. I wanted it in Mississippi, Louisiana, redneck language, where these people down here could understand it, and most anybody in the United States could. Even the South and the Yankees and all have a different language that they speak pretty much. It's the same language, but it's a different dialect. So I didn't want to go through a bunch of edits and stuff, and I've let Philip take a lot of criticism for it, but I'm the first to jump in there and take up for it too. You know, it's not Philip Mantle that messed this up. It's me. And I said, I wanted it just like I tell it. That's the way that it is.
Well, but there's something to be admired there, because in the world in which we are, there's a lot of sensationalizing stuff to make it sexier so it sells more.
Right. And I didn't want that, because actually, like I say, I had never talked about my story to my family or my friends. I still hadn't really sat down and talked about it. I said, y'all buy the book, unless one of them walk in and I'm on a radio or something. And I said, if y'all want to hear about it, go buy your book and read the damn thing. I don't want to talk about it. I talk about it every day of my life now. But I didn't want it over dramatized and changed, because it was bad enough like it was. You don't have to make a big movie and change it up out of it, make it better than what it is. Because, when you get down and live it, it's pretty bad. So, in that way, when my family reads the book, they can say, well, this is what happens to him. So I tried to put a little bit of history, a little bit about myself in there, how I was brought up. And then back in the 70s when this happened, there was no cell phones. There was no computers. We had a little black and white TV. We had tinfoil stretched across the antennas just so we could get a station or two with it. So you didn't hear nothing. Hell, I couldn't have told you what a UFO or alien was, because I didn't know. The only thing I knew is when something happened, the president gave a speech, or sometime on a Sunday we had Walt Disney come on, and they'd let us watch TV. And other than that, you wasn't allowed in the house unless you was coming in there to bring something in, because everybody had chores to do. You didn't have time to worry about all this. But it desperately changed my life. So that's the reason I wanted to come out with a book, and that's the reason I wanted it left in my words, so my family would know if I died that that was my language, that I was speaking to them and telling them about it.
I want to talk about some points that are covered in your book, and one of those includes a full transcript of the conversation that was had in the sheriff's department. Was it an audio tape that was uncovered, Calvin?
It was an audio tape, yes, sir.
Have you converted that to digital?
Yeah, Philip did, and he sent me a copy of it, and I still hadn't listened to it, and I tell you why, because there's a well, now we talking about the sheriff's department tape. I had jumped ahead of you. No, I had got a copy of that, and I don't. Philip has it in the book, word to word, what was said. And then I have got a copy of a CD that Bud Hopkins, when he hypnotized me in '93. And actually, I don't even remember being hypnotized.
So this was 20 years later?
Yes, sir. In '93, I had an incident where I went fishing, and I told my wife, I said, look, I'm not going to be out there long. I'm sure not going to be out there tonight. I'll be back before dark. And I went to an island that was 6 miles away, and I took my boat and we went over there. And when I got there, she had fixed me a lunch, and I was sitting down and fixing to eat the lunch. Well, next thing I knew, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and I still hadn't eaten my lunch. And that was wearing me. I was missing a lot of time in there, because this is from noon to 3 or 4 in the morning. So there was a friend of mine that invents medical equipment. He's really smart and up on everything. He said, you've got missing time. I said, well, you tell me about it. He said, no. He said, there's a book out now. Bud Hopkins has just written a book on missing times. He said, you need to go see him. He's got a conference going on in Tampa, Florida. And he said, the reason I know this, I live in Tampa, and he's going to be there speaking this weekend. Let's go. So I loaded up with him, and we left and went to Tampa. And I said, would you go in and talk to him? Because I don't know the man, and I don't want nobody to recognize my name and a big mob come out and want me to talk or something. So he did. He went in and talked to Bud and told him who I was. Bud said, I'd love to talk to him. I'll meet y'all at my motel room. He gave him a key card and said, I'll meet y'all at my motel room in 30 minutes or an hour. And sure enough, good to his word, Bud showed up. Well, we sat there and talked a little while, but make a long story short, Bud said, I want to hypnotize you. He said, this will help you. And I agreed to let him hypnotize me. Well, I didn't want to know what they found out or nothing, if they found out anything. Matter of fact, I didn't think I could be hypnotized. I didn't mind him trying, but I thought, yeah, this is a joke. I'm just sitting here wasting my time. And then when I wrote the book, I had mentioned to Philip that Bud Hopkins hypnotized me. Well, he jumped right on that. He knew Bud when he was alive, and he called Dr. Jacobs, and he said, have y'all got the tape? And they had the original tape where Bud had hypnotized me. And Philip transcribed all that out in the book. He made me a copy of the CD of it. So when I got the proof for the book, to read only just to proof it, book back, I was thumbing through there and I seen that Bud Hopkins hypnosis. I said, this is strange. I didn't think he'd ever hypnotize me, and it was pages of it. And I just started just kind of briefing through it. I wasn't reading it because I didn't want to know what happened. I wanted to remember on my own. I wasn't reading, but I just kind of thumbed through there. And I went out and I told my wife and my mother, I said, this is strange, and y'all going to think I'm kidding you, but I don't remember being hypnotized. Don't remember nothing about it. I barely remember seeing Bud Hopkins. So I just kind of folded it up. And the first memory that came back from it, Linda Howe was on a radio station, and she did her homework really good, and she had put together a thing, and she read it in the book. And she asked me some questions out of there, and it must have triggered a response out of me, because then my memory started coming back. I still wouldn't go read, still hadn't read where I'd been hypnotized. I'm just working off my memory now because I didn't want nobody putting nothing in my head. But that was shocking to me. That's been the most shocking thing about me writing this book, because I found out stuff about myself that I didn't know. And the one is me being hypnotized, because I would have bet money I never was. But, we've took polygraph tests, voice stress tests, been hypnotized. We got eyewitness accounts. We got everything that would stand up in a court of law in this book. So if somebody ever had a doubt or something, they could buy this book and read it, and they can get their eyewitness test. Even the Coast Guard, right after this happened, went out and investigated a scene where two people were fishing close to where we were, and they found, and it's documented in their report, and this is even in the book, and they had found some kind of vessel up under the water, and they reached and they touched it with something they used to get the lines off them poles with, and this thing took off like lightning under there and just disappeared. So this is documented by 6 Coast Guard employees. And it's just different things like this. It's eyewitnesses. And we've had, since the book's been done, Philip talked to him. He's from Italy or something, was over here going to some kind of school. And he was a preacher, and he had eyewitnessed that account that night on Highway 90 in the bridge. And I mean, said it to the T. And when he found out this book was out, he got a hold of Philip and talked to him. As a matter of fact, this guy had went and interviewed Charlie, not interviewed him, but talked to Charlie. He had pictures of Charlie and Charlie's wife and kids and all, and everything that went on there. So, you know, it was eyewitness reports. So, on all this. But
Calvin, are you okay with what happened to you?
No, not really. I still got a big problem with it, and the reason I say that, it's just like if you're in here watching TV in your house and somebody kicks your door down against your will and they drag you out there, and they throw you in a car and give you an examination and then throw you back out in front of your house and leave. That's a crime. They've abducted you. They've entered your space without your permission. And it would be different if they had come down and said, look, we want to give you an examination, just see what y'all made out of. I might have went along with it, and I'm not saying I would have, but I could have come near dealing with it like that.
You just wanted them to ask permission.
Right. And like I say, I might not have gave it to them, but I would have handled it a lot better. And chances are, if I knew they were serious, you know, I said, well, get your blood work or whatever you want to do. Do whatever you want to. But, you know, they didn't get no permission. They just come and they done it. And that's where I'm getting back to being like in a laboratory, like where you experiment with animals. You know, that's why I feel so strong about not doing stuff like that, because it's against their will. And I don't believe in putting anybody in anything against their own will.
Calvin, you mentioned an injection in the arm. Did that leave any lasting mark?
It did. Matter of fact, if you look real hard, even up till today, you can still see just a little bit of a puncture mark in there. And they documented that in the hospital, too. So, and what they figured it was, and one of them explained it, you know, being on this Air Force base down here, they had to give a lot of shots to people. And they got an air gun, and they just put a big bottle on it, and you walk through there, and they pull that trigger, and it shoots air and medicine into your arm. And they kind of figured at the hospital that that's what it was, some kind of air injection, because it just went right through the skin. I mean, right through it. And I had moved a little bit and made a little rip there instead of just a straight puncture. When you flinch, it rips the skin just a little bit. So, you know, it hadn't been real good. It's been a painful experience. It's been an experience where you take it against your will. It's been something that you just can't put behind you. You live with it every day. And here just lately, I've got where I can deal with it. I'm starting, since I'm talking about it, I'm starting to enjoy it a little more, because one thing, I'm getting out into the real world. I'm meeting real people. I'm meeting people that's been through these experiences. I had a book signing October 11th, the 45th anniversary right here in Pascagoula. They put on a book signing, so I went over there to do that. And the reason I went was to meet and to talk to the people. And it was a bunch. I don't know how many people showed up, but it was lines everywhere. And I got to meet a lot of people that just live here that wanted to know what was going on. There's some that said that or didn't say it, but they were in law enforcement then. You know, they retired now, and they had heard about it. And some that had actually worked the cases. So, you know, that helped me to get to meet these people. And I'm still meeting people on a day-to-day basis. My world is turned upside down. I used to just take my time and ease out, fish 3 or 4 days a week. I hadn't my boat's in the water, but I hadn't touched it in a long time to go fishing because I've been so busy with this. But it's getting back, you know, get your 15 minutes of glory and let it be over and done with. Everybody knows the story. You've accomplished your mission before you die. You've told your story. You got it out there. and that's the way that it is. So I'm not going to die with no secrets over my head.
Yeah, very courageous of you to do so, because all too often people don't tell their stories. People don't pass down the knowledge that they have learned to the next generation. It's not documented, and then it becomes wasted. Calvin, thank you for coming on the program tonight.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
And again, the book is Pascagoula, the Closest Encounter, told in Calvin's own words, as raw as it may be. Tonight, it's a tale of a close encounter and of an alien abduction, dare we call it, but not just any encounter. No, a fishing trip on the Pascagoula River in Mississippi, October 11th, 1973. It was certainly an event that Calvin Parker and his friend Charles Hickson would never forget. In the early evening, a strange craft descended and hovered a few feet above the ground, just a few yards away from them. An opening appeared in the craft and outfloated 3 humanoid creatures. Both men were absolutely terrified, as you can probably imagine, when these creatures grabbed them and took them aboard the craft, where they were subjected to an examination and feared they were about to die. Minutes later, Calvin and Charles were deposited back on the riverbank, and the craft departed. Taking off in their car, they located a public telephone and phoned the sheriff. While still disoriented, they were interviewed at the sheriff's office, and the next day, all hell broke loose as the press descended on this unsuspecting Mississippi town. Parker was seriously disturbed and stayed out of the spotlight for decades. Over the past 2 years since coming forward, the Pascagoula encounter has emerged from the depths where it was almost forgotten to be among the best documented cases of its kind in the world. Because of Calvin's 2 books, Pascagoula, the Closest Encounter, and Pascagoula, the Story Continues, a whole raft of new information has been uncovered, including documentations, photographs, hypnosis tapes, and a plethora of first-hand eyewitnesses. The popularity of the story is certainly evident by a TV documentary and a movie screenplay that are in the works. It's my privilege to welcome into the Parabnormal Calvin Parker. Hello, sir.
Hello. How are y'all doing today?
Fantastic. Good, because I get to talk to you and we get to advance your story. We've done one show about a year ago, and I was just absolutely mesmerized by your story. And it seems to be, ever since we had that conversation, I mean, your story literally has gone all around the world and back.
It has. It's in, right now, it's in several different countries and several different languages. And every day, something always pops up. Whether it's a strange visitor from that just wants to come by to talk, or somebody wanting to do different shows. It's just amazing to me. I never figured it would take off like this.
So tell us about what is in the works.
There's a documentary that's coming out the first of the year. And then, of course, we've been working on a screenplay, trying to get it together for a possible movie deal. You know, nothing written in stone yet. And first we got to do our part and get everything done. But we got a guy that's pitching it right now, and he seems to think that it's going to go pretty good. What our problem's being, though, Philip and I are trying to stay as close to the facts as what we can. And it's hard to do. And, you know, if you sell it to a movie someone that makes movies, it's going to be a little bit off. It's going to be a little bit different. But as long as the details are there, that's all we care about.
Are they trying to sexify it for Hollywood, so to speak?
Well, I'm sure they will. I don't know yet. It's just
because I mean, when you look at movies, Fire in the Sky was the very famous movie made after Travis Walton's incident, and not everything in that movie is entirely accurate.
Yeah, and it's going to be hard to get a movie that's entirely accurate on anything. And I didn't realize that up until we had started working on this. And I wanted to keep everything to the T, but it's kind of like, Philip had suggested to me, they might not be exactly the same number of policemen that picked you up or the same doctor's name that got you. It might be little changes here and there. But as far as the abduction part and what's been going on in my life and our lives, you know, I want that as close as what we can get it.
And I think that's important because, you waited an awful long time before coming out and telling your story. Why was that?
Well, number one, when this story broke, the news media pounded me. I was engaged to get married. This happened in October. I was engaged to get married in November, and her daddy was a real trip. I mean, he would have pulled my head off. So I really didn't want him to know about it. And where I worked, I didn't want them to know about it because here in the deep South, you get ridiculed pretty good for little bitty things. And to me, that was major. And, I just didn't want to talk about it. It was so upsetting.
What has been the reaction to your story, Calvin?
It's been amazing. Since this book came out, Philip and I started working on the book last year. Well, it's just been out a little over a year now. But we actually was going to release it in September, but we ended up having to do it in July because somehow it got on to Amazon. And out of popular demand, everybody wanted a copy. Now, to be honest, when I was doing this book, I didn't want to do the book. I did it for two reasons. I did it because I had Philip Mantle sitting on me, and I had my wife sitting on me. And, but as far as me, I personally didn't want to do a book. I didn't want the publicity. I was a recluse. I just kind of like staying to myself and working. But when this thing hit the market, I couldn't believe it. It completely changed my life, turned it around. I would have to say it's probably one of the best things that's happened to me. I met so many different people, and I mean good people too, not people that you think would be nuts and all that. Of course, I've met a few of them also, but most of the people that I've met and talked to are good, down-to-earth business people. They're sincere, they're friendly, and there's been no ridicule whatsoever. It's opened up my marriage, and you think about it. You keep a secret 45 years from a woman. Now, I didn't even tell my wife what had happened. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell my friends. So this was a secret that sat on my chest for 45 years, and I would get the look every now and then. I know every man that's married knows what the look is, and I would get that look every now and then. So when this book did come out, when her and Philip taught me into doing it, it was actually a blessing. It pulled the chains off, and it opened me up to the public, and that's where I wanted to be. I know I've been well accepted here on the coast. I didn't think, in Mississippi Gulf Coast, I didn't think I would be accepted there. Last October, we had a book signing, and people were lined up. They had the streets shut down, and it was cold. And people lined up down the block just to shake my hand, to meet me, to get my autograph. And it's been going on just like that ever since this has happened. But I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed getting out and meeting people and talking. But, again, I'm on a fact-hunting mission, and I figure the more people I talk to, the closer I might get to finding an answer of some kind to what happened to me.
But in your mind, you know what happened, and you know it's real, and you know what you encountered that evening.
Yes, sir. There's no doubt in my mind that it was life from another planet. But I had doubted it up until a long time ago. But, in my mind now, I know without a doubt. But I tried, after this happened, I tried to keep thinking, this didn't happen to me. A couple of rednecks borrowed some kind of scary craft and got out riding around drinking beer, and they did this for a joke. And that's what I wanted to believe. I didn't want to think that somebody from another planet would come down and abduct you. Now, the biggest difference that I seen with this deal, after we wrote the book, I never have studied anything about abductions or looked at pictures of aliens, unless it just happened to be something. The History Channel wasn't on. And back during this time, we didn't really have social media. So I started looking at pictures, and I thought, well, why didn't mine look like some of these? You know, I had to get an ugly old robotic-looking creature that just kind of manhandles you and injects you with everything you want to. And I thought a pretty decent-looking southern redneck that had abducted me. And when I say that, you know, the female alien, she looked more human than what you would believe. And I've even said on different shows, you know, if I was a drinking man and was in a bar drinking and not married and going to pick up a woman, I might have picked her up and went on a date with her. Instead, she picked me up and went on a date.
Yeah, we're just gonna leave that one right there. So you were going fishing. You and your buddy Charles. Describe the area you went to.
Well, we had got off work that day and went to the first place we went was the grain elevator. And they got these little bugs down here in the south. You can't see them at all, but they got to have the mouth the size of my wife sometime. I mean, when they bite hard. And we couldn't stand it there. So we left there and went to an old abandoned shipyard, the old Shaw Peters shipyard, where Charlie said he had been fishing for a good deal. And what that was an abandoned shipyard. Well, it was out of business. But people looked like they'd been dumping their trash there and all. And there was no trespassing signs. And I said, Charlie, you know, we got no trespassing signs, and this place is a dump. He said, well, let me explain the dump to you. The water gets high, and it brings in all this debris. Then when it leaves the debris positive. And as far as the no trespassing sign, it's been there for years. It's okay. So we decided to fish there. I took Charlie at his word, and that was my first mistake for the night. Was taking him at his word. I should have paid attention to trespassing sign and stayed away. But we walked down to the pier, pulled us up a log, I think, sat on the pier, and I was sitting there looking across the river at a big old ship. And I was thinking to myself, you know, me just going to work in this shipyard, now how does something made out of steel float? And that's when I noticed the blue hazy lights coming in from behind us. And they the same color as the lights on the patrol cars. So about that time, I guess Charlie noticed them too, and we both turned around and looked. And that's when just a real bright light just covered. You thought it was Johnny Law coming after you. I sure did, and I was already getting mad at Charlie. Matter of fact, I made the comment to Charlie real quickly, "You're getting me out of jail." But I wish it had been jail that he had to get me out of. That'd been better than where I was. So this light got so bright, it was blinding. And I was thinking, I wish to myself, I wish I'd turned that spotlight off. But then we noticed, coming out of this bright light, where our eyes was kind of getting adjusted, 3 bulky-looking creatures. Now, when I say bulky-looking, that's what they were. They didn't have a neck. Their heads just sat solid down on their shoulders. And they had kind of grayish, wrinkled skin. Now, Charlie's seen the face on them real good, and he described it later on. And I seen an artist sketch where he described it to Larry Flint later, what they looked like. Because I really didn't see the face, because my eyes was still kind of blurred. Well, these things floated right across the top of that grass, marsh grass, and 2 of them got a hold of Charles, and 1 of them got a hold of myself immediately. Now, I was scared to death by then. I'm not going to lie to nobody. But immediately, when he grabbed me by the arm, I heard something like a little whoosh of air or something. And what that was, and what we figured out later, and what the doctors has figured out, he gave us some kind of injection to kind of settle us down, or a sedative or something for the moment. Well, this thing, I settled down, and I couldn't move nothing but my head a little bit and roll my eyes a little. And he floated us to this craft. And I remember getting to the door and looking inside, because I was wondering where all these bright lights was coming from. But it wasn't no light fixtures. It was the walls. the walls was illuminated up like you paint lights into the walls. And I was thinking, well, this is crazy. I'd like to know the electrician here. And, all that kind of crossed through my mind because that's how settled I was when I got there. Well, he made a little left turn, took me down the hallway and made another little right turn. And it was one of the most beautiful tables I've ever seen in my life. And I call it an examination table, and it's an examination room because that's pretty much what they did. But it was made out of glass or maybe crystal or something like that. And he laid me on this table with my head angled higher than my feet. And I've always said maybe a 16 to 45 degree angle. And I was laid there looking straight up at the ceiling. Now, this big, ugly creature, he done backed up against the wall and got solid. I mean, he just shut down, just like you turned the switch off of him. And that's what kind of made me think they was robotic. But out of the wall came something the size of a deck of cards. And it came down and it stopped probably a foot and a half from my forehead. Then it started revolving around my head, and as it would go around, it would click about 4 times. And then it got about a foot and a half in front of my eyes and just shot back up into the ceiling.
What was it doing?
That I don't know. It was going around my head clicking, all I know. Now, thinking after being in MRIs and things like that, it could have been doing an examination of my brain or something, which if they knew what I had up there in my brain, they wouldn't examine nothing about it. They'd pick them somebody else. But what's so funny about this? I never had talked to Charlie about what happened to him. We never had a discussion about what happened. I never read Charlie's book when it came out. And the other day I picked this book up, or I say the other day, probably a couple of months ago, and I read where he had a big eye that examined him. And I thought that was kind of amazing. Now, he didn't describe it like a deck of cards. He described it like a big eye that was down and just looking over him. Now, I don't know if he thought it was a camera eye or what. But when this thing shot back up into the ceiling, for some reason, I just felt a presence that this wasn't over with yet, that like there was somebody else in the room, or maybe more than one person. And I kind of rolled my head to the right to take a look. By then, this drug was starting to kind of wear off that he gave us a little bit. And I noticed a female-looking creature coming toward me to the examination tables.
This was the one that you wanted to take on the date?
Yeah, the one I wanted to more or less take on the date. And this might not have been a female, but you know how a man can sense a woman's presence and a woman can sense a man's. And I just sensed that it was a female. Plus, later on, she telepathically talked to me, and it was in old Southern redneck girls, females, voice. So that's what made me think they might have studied me. And
what did she say?
Well, she says, we're not going to harm you, but it was Southern redneck talk. I've always picked at Philip saying that, you know, he didn't talk real English, and they're the ones that invented the English language.
So aliens have accents.
Yeah, this one did. But I think what they do, they study somebody, and they train themselves where they're not so frightening to you when they get there. But what she did was way frightening to me. You know, she kind of come out, she felt my cheek a little bit. That's when I noticed her hands. She had normal hands where the other one didn't. But her 2 middle fingers on her hands was a little bit longer than what's on a regular human's hands. And when she grabbed me by the cheek, I didn't feel no sensation, no warmth, no skin. I didn't have any feelings at all where she had grabbed me by the cheek. Now, the next thing she did, I had feelings pretty good there. She took her other hand and she put her finger across my chin and she pushed down. And then she took the right hand, and she run it down my throat behind that little hang-me-down thing back there. Now, what they call that, I don't know, but, I've had it swell up pretty bad, and it hurts pretty bad. But it hangs down right in the back of your throat.
The trachea?
I guess that's what it is. Lord, I don't know. I know it can be painful when somebody's got their fingers right up there behind
your windpipe, basically.
Yeah. And right behind it is your sinus cavities. And the way I know that, because she was trying to come up in them, and it just cut my air completely off. I was gagging. My nose started bleeding. I mean, I was getting to be a pretty big mess. I couldn't catch my breath. But that's when she pulled her fingers out. And telepathically, now her mouth didn't move, but telepathically, she said, "We're not going to harm you."
All right, hold that thought. An alien with its fingers in his mouth, a female alien with a southern accent, telling you that she is not here to harm you. The story of Pascagoula tonight. Calvin Parker, my guest. Philip Mantle will join us right after the break. I'm Jeremy Scott from the cold, dark depths of a secret dungeon somewhere deep in the remote Pacific Northwest.
In 1973, in one of the first and most famous cases of alien abduction, two men claim a UFO appeared in the sky above the Pascagoula River in Mississippi.
A real bright beam appeared all over us. But it kind of blinded me for a second, and when I got my vision back, I seen three bulky-looking creatures coming toward us.
There's no topic too deep for this show, especially when it leads into Parabnormal.
Pascagoula tonight, 1973 abduction in Mississippi. Calvin Parker is one of the experiencers, him along with Charles Hickson. He was telling us the story of this female alien with a southern accent with its hand down his throat and telepathic communication that they are not here to harm us. What happened next?
Well, she pulled her hand out, then she telepathically communicated they wasn't here to hurt us. And then she made a noise in her throat. This is the only noise I could hear that was verbal. And it's like the mating call of an alligator, if you ever heard one of them. It just travels all through everywhere. And this big, ugly creature in the corner, he just came alive. He jumped up like a jack-in-the-box and come back over to me and grabbed me by the arm. And that's when I heard another little poof of air. And it was another injection, I think. And he levitated me up, carried me out the door, put me down at the riverbank, facing the river with my hand stretched out. And that's when I first heard Charlie, that I knew he was there too. He said, Calvin, you okay, son? And I thought, well, no, I'm not okay. I was sitting here fishing, thinking about eating, and I got abducted by something. And to me, this was a crime. I mean, I didn't really like her after all this. It would have been better in my imagination than what it would have been there. So, Charlie and I sat and talked about it for a little while. We agreed not to tell nobody. But this is just the starting of the story. It leads on into a lot of different things.
So let's pause right there and bring in Philip Mantle, who's a UFO researcher, author, publicist, and lecturer. His interest in UFO research began in 1979 when he joined the British UFO Research Association and Yorkshire UFO Society. He is the publisher and with Flying Disc Press, and it's good to have you here, Philip.
Yeah, good evening, Jeremy.
Good evening to you all the way from the United Kingdom, where it is the middle of the night. Appreciate you being up. Now, what do you make of what Calvin has told us? I'm sure it's a story you've heard time and again.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it is unique in a lot of ways, but although there are then also similarities with other accounts from different parts of the world. It's fascinated me ever since I first read about it in the 1980s in a magazine here in the UK. And of course, Calvin's story differs slightly from Charlie's story, as Calvin just told you, that, a couple of the differences. So this is not two gentlemen who, for whatever reason, have sat down and concocted a story and said, right, we'll both tell the same tall tale, but because they don't, it's something different. And it's not just the encounter on the river that is unique. It's how both Charlie and Calvin reacted thereafter, and how this encounter, impacted their lives, literally for the rest of their life. As Calvin has explained, he basically went on the run. He married Waynette, and he would shy away from it at every opportunity, only occasionally lifting his head above the parapet. Whereas Charlie Hickson, who was, of course, somewhat older than Calvin. Charlie was 42 at the time. Calvin was only 18, almost 19. And but he reacted in a totally different way. He thought that he was being selected. He's special in that respect. I say special in inverted commas, and that something dramatic was going to happen, not just to him, but to us. And when I say us, I mean mankind. And he was preparing for that. He had no idea what this was, but he was confident that something was going to happen to the rest of humanity as a result of this encounter, or this encounter was part of it. So Charlie would go and speak at UFO conventions. He would speak to the media. He had correspondence and mail from all over the world. He'd even go and talk at your local church hall. He went on to co-author his own book in 1983 with a college professor called William Mendez. And, his own encounter, his side of the story is featured there. So it was just fascinated me ever since I first read about it. And again, like I said, it's not just what happened on the night. It's what happened to these two gentlemen afterwards that is equally as fascinating, and how it actually affected them and their lives.
Yeah, now you have examined some of the evidence yourself. Is that correct, Philip?
Yeah, I mean, when I first contacted Calvin, it wasn't to write a book. I'd got permission to republish Charles Hickson's book, UFO Contact at Pascagoula. And I thought it would be a nice thing to have an interview with Calvin and perhaps slot that in the back of the book somewhere, just to bring things a bit up to date. Because Charlie Hickson passed away in 2011. So once we decided to go down the book route, I asked Calvin if he had any documentation, photographs, illustrations, and he had nothing, pretty much, because Hurricane Katrina had taken it all. It washed it all away. So whilst we were preparing the manuscript, what we also did was launch a search for some of this lost information, documentation. For example, on when this encounter happened, I think it was just within the next day or so, Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Dr. James Harder appeared on the scene at their own expense, and both Charlie and Calvin were hypnotized by Dr. James Harder and examined. And Dr. Allen Hynek, of course, was an astronomer by profession, but he was also the scientific consultant to the United States Air Force Project Blue Book, which was their official UFO study, which has just been made into a fictional drama series. And before he went back home, Dr. Hynek held a press conference and said these two gentlemen are the real McCoy, so to speak, and then they should be treated, with respect. So we knew information was out there. So we set about asking both organizations and individual researchers who were active at the time, going back to 1973, if they had anything. And of course, Allen Hynek set up the Center for UFO Studies, so they were our first port of call, and they provided a file that they had. And in this file is a very curious letter. It's typewritten, so it's not done on a word processor. It's the old typewriter. And it's just a one-page document. We think it was written by Dr. James Harder. And it mentions that he gave both Charlie and Calvin a physical examination and uncovered, and I quote, puncture wounds on both gentlemen. Now, you've heard Calvin talk earlier about him feeling this pinprick and this whoosh of air. Was that the time that these puncture wounds appeared? So we have things like that, documentation, and a whole host of other material. Then when Calvin started to go public with his book, perhaps the most fascinating information is not bits of paper, but other eyewitnesses. Now, Calvin did a local spot on television. Someone posted that online and on YouTube, and somebody left a comment underneath this little news clip, and it said, "Oh, my mum and dad were there that night. They were on the opposite side of the river, and they saw it too." So I contacted this person. She gave me the telephone number of her mum and dad, who was, both still around, although they lived down in Alabama, not that far away, I'm led to believe. And we've spoken to them both. That's Mr. and Mrs. Blair. Mr. Blair, sadly, is very ill at the moment, but we interviewed him last year. A colleague of mine by the name of Dr. Irina Scott also interviewed them. And they said, Vernon, Mr. Blair, worked in the fishing industry, and he was on the opposite side of the river waiting for a boat to come in. It was very late. So, he was having asleep in the back of the car. When they saw the blue lights hovering and moving around over where Calvin and Charlie were, they didn't know they were there, of course. And then the boat finally arrived, and Mrs. Blair told me they were walking up towards the boat. By this time, it's very dark, and there is a splash, and I mean a big splash in the river next to her, literally. So she looks down, and she said, Philip, she said, there was a strange grey man in the water, and he went under the water and never came back up. Now, Mr. Blair said, he heard the splash, but, he didn't see the creature. So she threw his belongings onto this boat. Now, she had to go back down the pier, and she was scared, and she ran. Now, it's only within the past few months that Mr. Blair admitted that he did, in fact, see this creature, this being, this humanoid, he calls it. And he said, not only did I see it, I saw it going back across the water. And he said, I saw the UFO lift off. And I've spoken to him about it. We have him, on the record telling us about it. And he hadn't, like Calvin, he admitted seeing the blue lights, but he hadn't even told his wife that he'd seen this humanoid, that he calls it. And she was none too pleased, but he was ill, so she calmed down somewhat. Then we also have another gentleman by the name of Lewis Lee. Again, he was on the other side of the river that night, but he was working. He was working in one of the shipyards, and he was a crane operator. And I remember I spoke to him on the telephone, and he said, Philip, he said, my cab on the crane was about 10 or 12 feet from the ground. He says, and as soon as I got in it, I could see this thing out across the river. I can't do a Mississippi accent, I'm afraid, but he said to me, it was the darndest thing you ever did see. And he watched it for some time, and the only reason he took his eyes off it is because he had something on the end of his crane, and his colleague was shouting at him, so he didn't want to drop his whatever he had on his colleague and hurt him. So he said, I did whatever I had to do, and I turned back, and this thing had gone. Now, Mr. Lee had told his family and close friends about this, but he'd never gone public with it. And it's just by coincidence, he was at the book signing that Calvin mentioned, and he bought a book. And he mentioned something to Calvin, but then he was gone. So we didn't even have his name, but fortunately somebody was taking photographs, and there was Mr. Lee stood in front of, the table buying a book. So we posted the photograph on social media, and a lady came forward and said, yeah, I know who he is, and I'll speak to him for you. And then we went on to speak, and there's more. These are just a couple, but probably the most important. But there were others that, but see, where this incident happened. He's not out in the middle of nowhere. Calvin will tell you there's the bridge goes over the river. I think it's Highway 90. So it's not like Roswell in the middle of the desert, you know. So we knew from Charlie Hickson's book, because in Charlie's book there is a couple of witnesses there. So we suspected that there may well be other witnesses, but we certainly got a surprise with just the amount, but where they were actually located and what they observed themselves firsthand. Now, the documentary that Calvin mentioned is done, it's made, it is very accurate. Not only do they speak to Calvin, just by sheer coincidence, the producer of it is a chap called J. Michael, and Jay also did live in Mississippi, and he saw something on the same night, although he was some distance away. I think he lived about 100 miles from Pascagoula, and he was a high school student at the time, but he saw something that night himself. So it's kind of a road trip for him. He starts off with the documentary and tells you what he saw, and then he interviews some of the witnesses, and then he speaks to Calvin as well. So the documentary is very accurate, and that will be out next year. So, and we've also got news cut-ins, and we have correspondence between researchers. There was a very skeptical gentleman around at the time called Philip Klass. We found his archive of material. So, both witnesses and things related to this incident. For example, Calvin mentioned that there's a possible movie in the works. Well, unbeknown to any of us, in 1976 in Italy, the TV company called RAI, R-A-I, made a 2-part television movie about the Pascagoula incident, and it's called Extra. And you can find it online, but I even have Extra in 2 parts, literally arrived today on DVD. I cannot speak any Italian, but there's just for Calvin's ears, the gentleman, the actor that plays him is somebody called Luca Dal Fabbro. He plays Calvin Parker. Now, Calvin was totally unaware of that. There's no mention of this in Charlie's book either. So what else will turn up, Jeremy? Your guess is as good as mine. It really is.
Calvin, what does it mean to have these additional witnesses come forward to validate what you experienced?
Well, it was no doubt in my mind what had happened, but it meant so much for them to come forward and put their names on the line and to give the general public just an idea that I wasn't the only crazy one out there. And these people are legitimately not crazy. I took time to check them all out myself. I live down here by them. I know them now on a personal level. This is good, honest, hardworking people that all they want to do was just, like me, get a job and work. And they just good, down-to-earth people. And it felt really good for them to come forward. And by them coming forward, it's also helped me down here on the coast because, we have a lady, Rebecca Davis, that puts on a lot of book signings. Matter of fact, we got one Thursday of this week, and she knows a lot of different people. And I was able to meet the person that owned the Shaw Peters shipyard where we was fishing that night. He's 90-something years old now. And I got to meet him and several more different people that was around in this time period. And every one of them's always said, we've always known you have seen something, but like you, we just couldn't say nothing about it. And that makes you feel pretty darn good about it. And makes me wonder why I kept my mouth shut for 45 years.
Maria Blair, in an interview, who was one of the witnesses that Philip was telling us about, said that she noticed that this light was moving and not making a sound for about 30 minutes. What is your recollection of how long this lasted?
It's really hard to tell. What I do know is when we got there, it was a good full moon night. And I'm going to say probably around 5. And when we left the sheriff's department, that was around 11. Now, all that time wasn't spent aboard that craft. I'm going to say probably 40, 45 minutes might have been spent on the craft. I'm not just real sure. I can't say very positive about how long we was really in there.
Can I just interject there, Jeremy? I mean, one of the curious things that Charlie and Calvin did, of course, neither of them had a watch on. Neither of them had a watch. I don't think Calvin even wears a watch to this day. And, of course, when the sheriff's department came out to meet them and escort them into town almost, Calvin will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but they stopped at the newspaper office and looked through the window. They weren't looking for a journalist, but they thought that there was a clock on the back wall in there. Certainly this is what Charlie says. They were looking to find out what time it was. They didn't know.
Well, see, in Mississippi, they have blue laws. There weren't any stores or anything open where you could stop and see. And the reason we didn't wear watches, working around metal, you're slinging a sledgehammer all day long, and one just won't stand up to it. And then the only place that we could see lights on, and it was on the way to the sheriff department, and the sheriff was right there in front of us, was this Mississippi Press building. And they got a big window, but I've noticed their clocks don't work in there. Of course, they're not there anymore, but apparently they didn't work because we still didn't know what time it was.
Just give you another example of what was happening that night as well, Jeremy. I spoke to the police dispatcher who was on duty that night. He's now retired, and he estimated that he took around 50 calls that evening of UFO sightings. And when he came off duty and went back to the police station, and this kind of links into someone else you're speaking to tonight, he said there was even a clergyman, a pastor, in the police station also reporting it. And there were others there as well. So it wasn't just a handful of people that saw things that night. It was an awful lot.
Calvin, were you put in or taken into the water? Were you wet?
No.
Do you remember?
No, sir, I wasn't wet. This craft landed in behind us close to where my car was parked. Now, something else that happened that was amazing, and I never did get the insurance form from the sheriff's department, but the windows on the passenger side was shattered in place. And then when Charlie opened his door, that one fell out. Now, another thing, and my brother-in-law reminded me, because I took his car over there and left it parked in the field for a long time, and I don't know what they done with it because it was a fairly new car, but it was useless. He said, well, did you mention to anybody about the burn marks on top of the car? I said, well, look, Hosey, I didn't know it was any burn marks on top of the car. He said, yeah, we got out and looked at the car real good. But when I went to put my keys in, I did notice one thing. The door was, it was like a magnet toward the car. You know, it will pull your keys in there to it. And the car didn't run. It had graphite spark plug wires in it. And the reason the car was running real bad, a part of it, we had to stop and get spark plug wires before I went back to Laurel, was that graphite, any kind of magnetic field or something, pulls this graphite apart. And that affected the way that the car run. It just wouldn't run right. So, you know, it's a lot of little things that I think about now that I didn't think about then. All I could think about then is getting back home, getting away from Mississippi Gulf Coast.
Calvin, what was the media coverage like in the immediate aftermath of this incident?
Well, the next morning, Charlie and I got up and went to work as usual. We was planning on working. And I noticed, of course, this was my second day there. I noticed in the parking lot, it was full. We brassed in, and that's the same thing as punching a time clock. We got brassed in, and we was called to the office within 5 minutes after we was in. The owner of the company, Johnny Walker, said that, look, we cannot conduct any kind of business whatsoever today. We can't use our phones. y'all have this whole dang place shut down. He didn't say it that nice. And we've got to give some kind of press release out. Y'all can't go out and work in the yard because everybody's going to want to talk to y'all and find out what went on.
Hold that thought. Calvin silenced after returning to his workplace after the Pascagoula abduction in 1973. He's joining us with Philip Mantle from the United Kingdom, and we'll continue right after this. Pascagoula tonight on Into the Parabnormal. I'm Jeremy Scott.
I noticed they kind of moved mechanical-wise, and they was floating off the ground. By the time we stood up and turned around, they was there on us.
They were having an easy time catching catfish. They didn't realize they'd be the next one snared.
So two of them got a hold of Charlie. One of them got a hold of myself. And instantly I felt like that I just got relaxed.
There's no topic too deep for this show, especially when it leads into the paranormal.
1973, Pascagoula River, Mississippi. Calvin Parker, Charles Hickson are fishing, although they do much more than just fish on this evening. They're taken from the shore. They're taken up into a craft. They're probed on board that craft. They make it to a phone. They call the sheriff. They're then interrogated at the sheriff's office. Now, second day on the job, Calvin returns to work, and they're hauled into the office. And basically what had happened is the media had basically taken over the town.
They had, and it wasn't just local media, it was national media. They was from everywhere. They had these little deals, uplinks on top of their trucks, and they was out in the parking lot with them things going up and sending signals back to wherever the world they send them to. So he pretty much told us, y'all going to have to give a press release, and he furnished his own shipyard attorney to come in. And of course, I didn't talk too much. I figured Charlie had broke the news. He might have stayed up and called somebody, but that wasn't the case. But I know they did get a hold of it. Later on, I figured out it was through police scanners. Anyhow, they worked up the press release, and then that's when the sheriff came over, said, we're going to have to get y'all checked out. So they took us to the Singing River Hospital and got an examination, and they did blood work. They did all kind of stuff. They looked at our arm where we had the puncture marks. And that doctor that did this, Dr. Bosco's still alive today, and he's 99 years old. And then they told us he thought we was free from giving anybody any kind of disease or anything. Then we went to Keesler Air Force Base and got checked for radiation. Now, the sheriff drove us to Keesler, and they just flagged us on through the gate like they knew something was wrong or something was going on, and they was on a mission. When we pulled up to that dock at the back, there was 6 guys in hazmat suits. They asked us, stepped out of the car, and told everybody else to get back. Well, they checked us for radiation, decided it was pretty much clear, and said they want to see y'all. There's a conference room in the back. Walk down this hall. And I remember walking down that hall thinking I never was going to get there. It was one of the longest walks because I was scared, I was tired, and I hadn't talked to my family. I didn't know how they was going to react. But we got back and we was treated. There was some Air Force officials there and the mayors of the local cities. We have 3 little local cities down here and the police departments from all the coast cities. And we was treated with the greatest respect anybody could be treated in. Now, I let Charlie be the mouthpiece pretty much. I talked a little bit. And there's actually, I think Philip actually has a copy of the minutes from that meeting. So when they got through, they said, y'all can go. Well, on the way back, make a long story short, we got in the car with the sheriff, and he told us, he said, y'all don't leave. There's someone that needs to talk to you. And this person was John Allen Hynek and Dr. Harder. Now, how they made it down that fast, I don't know. And I'm got to be friends with his son when we was in Arizona. And I asked Paul Hynek, I said, how did your dad make it down that fast? He said he had to be already there on his way or somehow. But it's just like magic, you know, getting the news out. Everybody knew about it. All the important people showed up to the ball game. And Hynek I wouldn't call it an interrogation. Hynek took me in a room, and Harder took Charlie in a room to start with. And Hynek, and like I say, not an interrogation, but he asked some pretty intelligent questions, I thought. And then we changed up, and I went back with Harder, and he gave me a physical exam, and Hynek talked to Charlie. And then he asked us to stay around till the next day. He wanted to go out and look at the site. And I remember the next morning when we seen him, he was upset because the sheriff department or the police department didn't wrap off this like a crime scene with tape so he could get in and investigate and maybe find something. And by that time, this site was wrapped up with news media. Everybody had beat us out there, and, you know, nobody guarding the evidence, as I would say. So, you know, it could have been handled a lot different. But in their defense, nobody knew how to handle something like this back in. So after that, and after seeing Hynek again, of course, I've told everybody I got hard, fired, and a physical all in the same day. So, you know, that was the end of my career at the shipyard. And I guess it was probably the end of Charlie's. I never talked to him too much after this. You know, I seen him on occasions. And, but we never really talked about what happened. And where the Philip class deal come in, you know, we was at lunch, and Philip was real intimidating toward Charlie. He wasn't saying too much to me. And it kind of made me mad, and I got us thrown out of the restaurant because, you know, regardless of what he was saying about Charlie, Charlie was there with me. He was the one eyewitness that was an eyewitness that I could count on. And at the time, I didn't know all these other people were there. We had been through something spectacular together. And, you know, I felt like I owed it to Charlie just to really get on to Philip's case, and that was the bottom line of it.
Philip, do you think that having J. Allen Hynek investigate this adds more credibility to Calvin's story and Charles' story?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, Dr. Hynek was well respected both in the scientific community as well as the UFO community. Shortly after this, of course, he launched his own civilian UFO research group, the Center for UFO Studies. And we have confirmed both with colleagues that worked with him at that time and later, plus, you know, with his son, Paul Hynek, who is now on friendly terms with Calvin, that this incident at Pascagoula, out of the hundreds that Dr. Hynek investigated, both as part of the official Air Force study and his own studies in civilian life, this one was his favorite. And the one thing we have not been able to locate, although we got a file from the Center for UFO Studies, we have been, again, reliably informed by several people who worked with Dr. Hynek that he had his own file on this case. And it's one of the few files that he actually took home with him. And it wasn't left in the office with the rest of them. And, of course, when he passed away, the file, you know, melted away into obscurity. I believe I know who had the file, but again, he's since passed away. So we are on the hunt for that particular file. There may be nothing out of the ordinary in it, but, we don't know. So it's one of the pieces of information and that we're trying to track down. But we are, to have Dr. Hynek attached to the case in any respect can only benefit it. And he wasn't afraid of saying cases were fake or hoaxed or had a rational explanation. But as I said earlier, when Hynek left to go back home, the last thing he did was hold a press conference and say that these two gentlemen were the genuine article. And in subsequent years at various places where he was speaking, for example, we have a tape-recorded event that he spoke at, I think it was 1976 in Canada. And it's a long lecture, but part of the lecture is devoted particularly to this encounter. And we had the permission to use that. It's not in the public. It wasn't in the public domain until recently. It's one of these things. It was a tape recording that had, been sat in someone's drawer for years. And so we transcribed that particular part of it. And again, he says, so this is, 3 years after the event, he's still saying this was the genuine article, and he gives his reasons why. One of the things that Calvin hasn't mentioned tonight, but has on previous occasions, of course, and it's a central theme of the encounter, is that when they were at the sheriff's department, they were interviewed separately, but then they were placed in a room together, Charlie and Calvin, and there was a desk there, and they were left alone for a few moments. Unbeknown to both of them, there was a tape recorder playing in that desk, and one of the deputies came and retrieved it, and they thought, right, well, we'll have them now. We'll have them tape recorded, laughing and joking about this foolish stunt. But, of course, when they played it back, that wasn't the case. They were still talking about what happened to them, how they were going to tell their families, how frightened they both were. Yeah, and they had no idea. Calvin, I think, says he needed something for his nerves to calm him down or something to that effect. So that when the the sheriff's department heard this, it's been now called the secret tape, because it was at the time. It kind of made them change their attitude towards them. And, of course, Charlie and Calvin were totally oblivious to this tape, but it was played to Dr. Hynek when he visited them down there as well. So he had access to it. So, again, when you put all these things together, Jeremy, from the incident that happened, how the gentleman reacted afterwards, they first phoned Keesler Air Force Base, who said, we don't investigate UFOs anymore, phone the sheriff. So they phoned the sheriff, were interviewed both separately and secretly by the sheriff. Then you have Hynek and Harder coming down. You have the press onslaught. Then you have the way that both gentlemen reacted afterwards, not just in the days, but I'm talking down the years. And then you bring it right up to date, whereas just by chance, because Calvin's now gone public, others that were in and around the area that night have now stepped forward. And every single one of them, Jeremy, by the way, that has contacted us has allowed us to use their real name. We can use pseudonyms, of course, but they've all said, no, enough's enough. Calvin's been brave enough to step forward. Now it's our turn, and by all means, we'll go on the record. So when you put all that together, and one last thing, that people maybe not aware of, is that the town of Pascagoula itself, earlier this year, erected a historical marker near the scene to commemorate the event in both Charlie and Calvin's name, and it was unveiled by the mayor, which again, is totally unique to any event that I'm aware of. So when you put all that in a line, it makes this incident that happened in 1973 to be, without a doubt, the best documented close encounter on the record. And I've said that in public. I've said it in Calvin's book, and I stand by that. And, make of it what you will.
I really appreciate your perspective, Philip. Thank you so much for joining the show tonight.
My pleasure.
I can't stress enough how authentic
this case is. I don't put usually my reputation behind many a tale that we bring you here on the program, but the amount of evidence that we have here, the additional documentation, and the additional witnesses that have come out in this case are just absolutely the tipping point for me as far as that is concerned. And joining us now, along with Calvin Parker, is Stefanos Panagiotakis.
How you doing, Stefanon?
I'm very fine. I'm very glad I'm here, the voice of my friend Calvin Parker.
Yeah, it's good to hear yours, too. And, something else that come up talking about the news release, the very next day, Sheriff Fred Diamond, which was a pretty hard-nosed sheriff, give a press release to the papers. He says, I know without a doubt there's something that happened to these guys because they were scared to death. And that you can get that offline right there.
Now, Stefanos began his career as a radio officer in the Greek Merchant Navy in 1973. He retired in 1998, and in 1979 joined the Greek UFO team Phaethon and was appointed as a researcher and investigator of UFO cases outside of Greece. He was an independent reporter for the first Greek UFO magazine, and he's the author of The Road to Pascagoula, a research trip, 1981. That's the name of the book. It was about 8 years after the encounter. That year, after accidentally finding himself in Pascagoula, he went on to research the incident. What did you find, Stefanos?
I find a new witness, a witness who was well known there, but he refused to speak. He was speaking only to Mr. Hynek on the telephone. He refused to meet him in person, and he told me just a few things, not details. But I was very lucky. I met this man because he was from a Greek origin. And he opened the door and he opened his mouth and he told me everything, what happens to him and to his companion about half an hour before this strange craft starts to descend and arriving in front of Calvin and Charlie.
So did they have an encounter prior to Calvin and Charlie's?
Yes, he was. It was Mr. Sigalas, the name of this witness, Emmanuel P. Sigalas. He was born in USA, but his parents they are coming from Greece, from the island of Kefalonia, and that very day he was. In a car with Mr. Raymond Brodas and a young girl, Miss Joanne Hallmark. And they were driving, they heading for a place where they visiting every Thursday in order to preach people who cannot control their habit for alcohol. And while they're driving, they notice, the little girl first noticed a cylindrical, on the left side of the car, a cylindrical object which seemed to following them. Sigalas didn't pay much attention. He saw it, but the girl asked him and said, Mr. Sigalas, I think I see something up in the sky. And Sigalas told her that it might be a helicopter which goes to Kistler Air Force Base. It's a base very close to Pascagoula, just outside, near to Biloxi, in the middle between Pascagoula and Biloxi. And Mr. Sigalas asked his friend, and I say, hey, Ray, what might this thing might be? Because it doesn't look like an helicopter, and it was a type of craft that has any lights like the airplanes or the helicopters. It didn't act like a helicopter or like a aircraft. And while they're driving, this object following this car, and it was in a height about 3,000 feet. Mr. Sigalas tried and he lowered the speed of the car, and the object did the same thing. And when he increased the speed, the object sped up as well. So this thing is keep doing about 10 miles. And after a while, as they turned towards Van Cleef, the place where destined to go, the object stopped, dived towards the car a little bit, and then disappeared. And it was a very strange object, as Mr. Sigalas told me. And it has an extension, something like a fringe pointing out in the direction of about 2 o'clock on its main body. And he also told me that this object was covered by very bright light, and his shape was oval. He tried to understand exactly what it was, but it was in vain. The little girl told him, Mr. Sigalas, I think I saw God, because Mr. Sigalas was a priest. And he said to her, oh, don't worry, but be sure of that. Who is in this world is capable to build such a thing? And what Mr. Sigalas told me about the object they saw. The object as I told you before, it changed course and headed toward Sopeter shipyard, where Calvin and Charlie, they are fishing at this time. I don't know what they're fishing. They're fishing nothing, as they said. They were very unlucky that day. And so they became the fishes of other creatures. This is the story with this, what I found with this witness in Pascagoula. And 2 days after, I met Charles Hickson in person at his home.
Stefanos Panigantakis, who was telling us about his investigation that he writes in The Road to Pascagoula, which was about a research trip in 1981. First, about interviewing a witness who told of an encounter that predated Calvin's by about 30 minutes or so. And then you had the opportunity to interview Charles Hickson. Stefanos, what did he tell you?
Yes. He told me briefly about what happened in Pascagoula, because I asked him not to tell me the details, because everybody knows what happened. And he mainly focused on what he felt about this. And the most important, he told me that when these creatures, probably they were robots, the 3 creatures that came out from the craft, they were robots. And he told me that he was sure that there were creatures behind this, but at this time he didn't realize it. Also, he told me that he saw Calvin passing away at the moment when one of the 3 creatures touched his hand, his arm, and then he started to open his heart to me and tell me things that these creatures told him, that there will be when the time comes, they will be revealed to the people, to the world. And also he told me that this was a message from God. He read a lot about the Bible, but he was not fanatic, or you understand. He accepted the life in other planets, and he told me that God not only create humans, but millions of other planets carrying life like us, creatures similar or like us. And he told me that God never make mistakes, because he's not a human. This is something which impresses me a lot. He told me that, Stefanos, I know God never make mistakes because he's not a human. And he told to me, I believe in the supreme God. And he released me and sent these things to me. And they are beings from another world. And this is something God explained to me. And when the time comes, they will be revealed, and nothing can change it. Also, he was very anxious about this, and And at this time, Charlie wrote his book with Mr. Mendes, with the assistance of Mr. Mendes. And he told me for the first time, because I think no one knew it at the time, at 1981, when I was there on July 19 of 1981. He told me that the creatures made contact with him 2 times after the incident in Pascagoula, the next years, in 1974, 2 times. And the second time was all his family they were witnessing it. And he tried to, because the craft of these beings arrived and hold it above the car of Hickson family, and he wanted to go out and meet these creatures, but his wife, Mrs. Blanche, and his son, and he grabbed him and don't let him go out from the car. And he heard a voice inside in his mind, and they said to him, "Charlie, don't worry, there will be another time when we'll meet again." So he was ready to accept this. He also told me that he knew that the world was destroyed 5 times before, and this is going to be the 6th time, but it's not going to happen, because these creatures are here for us, not just to avoid the human race to destroy itself for the 6th time. And he also told me that all the humans till now, since the day of the creation till now, they were born and died 5 times, and he also. And this is the last time. Then the creatures will appear to the human race, but first they must be prepared for this. And when the time comes, he will go to the national television and say about. Now Charlie is dead. He's passed away. And personally, I believe that he never died. He is with his friends now. All the details are in my book, because I spoke with Charlie for 3 hours, and these 3 hours are in my book. What he told me many, many things. We don't have the time to discuss it now, or to tell to the people. And also in my book, there are my contact with Mr. Sigalas and other witnesses and other local people from Pascagoula. And I heard many, many stories that happened just after the incident in Pascagoula, after the incident of Charlie and Calvin. Many people start to see things. And the whole America started, because a very UFO flap, a very big flap, started from Gulf of Mexico and arrived up to Canada. There happened many stories.
I appreciate you so much, Stefanos, for coming on. He's joining us from Greece, so it's really, really late, and so I really do appreciate that. We got a special treat for you. There was of course, you know this story. We've been telling this story, and it certainly has attracted a lot of attention since Calvin first came out last year in 2018. It has only been a year. A Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter by the name of Johnny Cobb and master guitarist Jerry McCoy have written and are going to perform for us a song inspired from this incident, Black Water, Blue Moon.
Black water, blue moon, strange things have been Pascagoula. It was an October night, fishing on a Mississippi riverbank. Sky lit up, time stood still, my whole world changed against my will. We met black water and a blue moon. Silence is louder than thunder in June. Black water, blue moon, some strange things happening in Pascagoula.
from my back out across the water, a real bright beam appeared all over us. It kind of blinded me for a second, and when I got my vision back, I seen three bulky-looking creatures coming toward us. Telepathically told me, don't be afraid, we're not going to hurt you. You can't really pin everything down. You don't really know. And that's the point I'm holding out. I don't know what happened. I know something happened.
I ran from my fears nearly all of my life. I couldn't tell anyone, not even my wife. And then that water and a blue moon, the silence is louder than thunder and tune. Black water, blue moon, strange things happening past the cooler. Black water, blue moon, strange things happening past the cooler. Black water, blue moon.
You heard it right here. Blackwater, Blue Moon. Johnny Cobb with us right now. Hello, Johnny.
How are you doing, Jeremy?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the program. That's a hell of a song you and Jerry wrote and performed for us.
Well, I greatly appreciate it. It was truly inspired by Calvin, and I just felt compelled that I've been listening to Calvin give the interviews over the last couple of years, and I was actually familiar with the case when it happened in the 70s, and just hearing him give these interviews, I just was drawn to try to do something more than just listen, and I'm just so glad that he accepted the song, and as you can tell, he made a cameo appearance on it.
Hey, Calvin, did you ever think you'd be featured in a song?
Never did I think that. And I really love this song, too. I was just thinking while we was listening to it, talking about a good country and western song would be the female alien. Me getting to be her. But this is a great song. I enjoy it.
Thank you, Cal. I appreciate it.
My wife really loves it. I'm about ready to throw that CD I made out the window sometime.
You've been playing it on repeat, I guess, Calvin?
She has, yeah. I listen to it. You can only hear a good thing so many times. And me trying to drive sometime, if she turns it wide open, I mean, it sounds like a bar room. You pulled up beside these cars where these rappers and all's got their music up, we drowned them out. But I enjoyed the song, and I really appreciate Johnny and Jerry doing this. They don't know how much.
Well, I tell you, we greatly appreciate you accepting it and embracing it. And Wayne is just a wonderful woman. And, I want to give credit to Philip, too, because Philip and I became Facebook friends. And over the past few months, we've been exchanging not emails, but Facebook private messages. And basically, when Philip brought up this title, Blackwater, Blue Moon, I was like, oh, my gosh, that's the title that we could write a song for Calvin about the whole story. And so Philip actually triggered that thought of inspiring a song title. And then from that point on, Jerry and I got together over the phone. Jerry lives in Arkansas, and I live in North Carolina. He has his studio there. I have mine here. And we basically wrote the song long distance. And once we had it to where I could actually put a vocal down, I did the vocal here, sent it to him. Then as he was actually putting all the music together, Jerry played all the guitar parts, the bass, the drums, the background vocals. I put together a little video that I actually could go on YouTube and do a search for Blackwater, Blue Moon, the Calvin Parker story by Johnny Cobb and Jerry McCoy on YouTube. You can see the video. And then Calvin and Philip said, you should make this song available for people to download. I was like, well, if it's okay with you guys, that'd be wonderful. So a few weeks ago, we got the notice that Amazon Music it has it where you can download it there, and actually all the digital platforms has it available now. And but I just want to tell Calvin, I've listened to him so many times on interviews that writing the lyrics for this song just is a songwriter's dream. The lyrics just flowed out, and it was just it was a labor of love, and I greatly appreciate his just kudos on and everything, and just really happy to be
Johnny,
here.
I appreciate you, buddy. And hopefully, if it's a movie, I'm hoping this will be the theme song on the movie. Of course, once you sign your rights away or something, you don't have much choice. But I'm going to do everything I can to make the title of the movie out of this, plus make this the theme song on the movie. I've got to where when I do a interview of some kind, I get them to play the song, the in and out. And then Thursday, when I go to this book signing, I'm not going to give them a choice. I'm going to get on the police PA speaker right there and plug it up in one of their cassettes. And I'm going to be playing it at the book signing.
Calvin, no, not cassettes. It's 2019, buddy.
Oh, yeah. Well, I kind of live out of... I'm a little behind times. I've been in hiding so long.
Oh, man. Well, it should be made a movie.
You ought to see me getting used to computers and all. I come in from doing a spreadsheet. I actually went into business for myself, and I kept everything on the old-timey spreadsheets. But I could tell you to the penny how much money I made and lost.
Oh, that's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, well, this is all new to me. I mean, it's exciting. It's new. I've met some real great people, and I'm just really looking forward to another year on it.
Johnny, were you going to say something?
Well, one thing that I hope that Calvin makes you feel like you've always known him, and I'm sure you already picked up on that, Jeremy. It's just from the private Facebook messages, basically, I kept on telling Calvin we were working on a song, but I didn't send him anything until the final thing was finished. And when we got everything finished and it was on, and I put it to the video and I had it on YouTube, that's when I sent my private message and said, well, here it is. And I didn't know how it was going to be received because we just kind of like just did this without asking anybody's permission. And within about an hour or so after I had sent it to him on a private message, my phone rang and I looked down and it said, Mississippi. I went, there's only one person I could possibly know in Mississippi, and it was Calvin. And he called me, man, just to thank us, which really that was wonderful. That was great. That was one of the greatest calls I've ever received. So I really do appreciate that.
Well, this song's been a blessing to us, and the way I found out it's out, I guess my wife stays on Facebook a lot. I heard her in there singing the song. So I said, where did you get that song from? And I think that's.
I was going to say, Johnny, as a singer-songwriter, you wrote the lyrics, right, to this?
Yeah, what we do when Jerry and I, since we're long distance, when we write everything over the phone, I basically, after Philip put that thought in my mind of, Blackwater Blue Moon, I thought that'd be a great Calvin Parker story song. I sat here and kind of jammed around on the keyboards just to get some basic chords and a basic melody. And then I called Jerry and told him the whole thing about Calvin and what I had an idea about how we could do a song. So Jerry was like, let's do it, man. So basically what we do, I send Jerry a little scratch vocal of me kind of scat singing what lyrics I had at that particular moment and a little bit of the chord progression. I send it to him over in Arkansas. Then he starts putting together as a full music track. While he's doing that, I'm working on the lyrics. And when I get the lyrics finally finished, I call Jerry and go, here's what I've got. What do you think? And then he'll, as an editor, he'll go, I like this. I like that. How about changing this here or there? So basically, we got down to the point where I said, well, I don't have a second verse, but I got this concept. And I said, I don't know if Calvin's going to like this or not, but I said, I'm going to put together some sound clips of some of the interviews that I've heard Calvin do over the years, because there are certain key points that really make his story complete. And so I was able to find certain sound clips and put them in an order to where Calvin kind of told the little story there in the second verse. And so when I sent that to Jerry, he was like, man, this is going to be great. And so next thing I know, Jerry got the whole track recorded, got my vocals set into the track, got it mixed, sends it back over to me. I put it into the YouTube video, and then send it to Calvin and Philip and Wynette and just keep our fingers crossed. But I'm hoping at some point that somehow I can meet Calvin and Philip at one of the events and maybe have the backing track there where Calvin can come up on stage and we can actually perform the song together. You know, just to have a function where somebody could actually.
I'd certainly love to be there for that moment.
Me too. Because Calvin said he sings the blues.
It sounds like a lot of fun.
Well, I tell you what, we're gonna hold you, because I remember the last conversation you and I had. You said something about that you and Travis were sitting around playing the guitar and singing, and so that would be a wonderful thing. I'd love to hear you do anything you want to sing.
I can't sing, especially not in y'all's lead, but this song would be fun to do with y'all, and I pretty well know the part.
Well, no, you just do the second. All you have to do is the second verse, Calvin.
Yeah, the second verse, and I pretty much know that because I've given probably 3,000 or 4,000 interviews, and it's about the same every time.
Johnny, are there lyrics that stick with you more than others in this song?
Well, you know, by hearing Calvin tell his story, and his story is always so heartfelt, there were certain things that he was saying about against his will. You know, his whole life changed against his will, and that he couldn't tell anybody, not even his wife, and so those kind of lines, and these are directly out of his interviews that I'm going, okay, there's some key factors here that it's kind of hard to tell somebody's entire experience in a 3-minute song. But I thought, well, you know what? He was out fishing on a riverbank, and I'm going to tell you something, man. I do a lot of gigs on the road where I'm driving late at night coming back, and I have to admit that I'll put that song on, and I'll listen to it 25 times on the way back to North Carolina from Myrtle Beach after playing a gig, not because it's just me, but just because I'm listening to it and going, I really do like this. It's kind of like I'm listening to it as an outsider. And but Calvin inspired the lyrics, and it was like a songwriter's dream, to where I knew there were certain key things I wanted to say. It was just a matter of how do I say them in a way that's never been said, but at the same time be Calvin's words, like his books, where, you know, it's so much more enjoyable to read his book, seeing his own words in print. And so that's what we want to do with the song, where it's just like Calvin's telling the story, like he's singing the song. And,
well, Johnny, you have an amazing talent, and I really appreciate you coming on the program, allowing us to play that great song. Best to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. You're one of my favorite shows to listen to, and I can't wait to go to your archives and retrieve this and listen to it again.
Where it will live forever. You're okay with that, Calvin, right?
Oh, definitely. And, Johnny, be sure and tell Jerry thank you also. Y'all did a great job. Thank y'all.
I will, and I love you, Calvin. Thank you so much for embracing us. I do appreciate it.
That's Johnny Cobb and Calvin Parker. Thank you so much for an out-of-this-world show.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. From the cold, dark depths of a secret dungeon somewhere deep in the remote Pacific Northwest, I'm Jeremy Scott. Night-night, friends.
And rest in peace, Calvin Parker.